Awesome. So let's get started. Again, welcome everyone to this webinar on building your first Microsoft Teams app using the SharePoint framework. My name is Vlad Catrinescu. I will be your host for this webinar, but I'm actually not the main presenter. The main presenter will be my good friend and I will say kind of good developer, Sébastien Levert. How are you doing, Seb?
I'm doing good. Thanks for the kind of good.
Well, I did say that you're a good friend right before, so that kind of prepared the field a bit.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Vlad.
Before we get started, some housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and will be shared afterwards with everybody that has registered. So if you ever have to drop because of an emergency or you want to go back and review some of the cool things Seb is showing, it will be it will be emailed to you by end of day tomorrow, as well as the slides and other content. On this, Seb, the floor is yours.
Cool. Well, thanks, Vlad, for the opportunity. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. I am really excited to talk about, I think, one of my most exciting topic in the last couple of months, whereas how you can build your first Microsoft Teams application using the SharePoint framework. So one of the things that I really like is the SharePoint framework. Have been a SharePoint framework guy since the very, very early days, but I also jumped on the Microsoft Teams bandwagon as a developer as soon as it started. And I felt that the experience was so different and it was hard to kind of find my the right elements. It was hard to find my marks in there. And now I want today to kind of introduce you to how you can actually utilize your SPFx skills and put them to work in Microsoft Teams. So first, like maybe to introduce myself, my name is Seb or Sebastian or that kind of good developer, as Vlad just said. I am the product lead at a company called Valo, where we build digital workplace solutions. I am also Microsoft MVP, mainly focusing on Office development, so basically SharePoint Framework, Microsoft Graph APIs, and also Microsoft Teams development. So if you have any questions, feel free to add me on Twitter, ping me over there. It's going to be my pleasure to help you. Or also today, if you want to post some of the questions in the chat, I'll try to monitor it, but at worst case at the end, Vlad, if you can ask some of the questions, it will be my pleasure to answer them. If you also find a moment in my presentation where you think it might fit well, feel free to stop me there.
Sounds good.
So what's our agenda today? How are we going to go through this SharePoint framework story altogether? So first, we are going to talk about Microsoft Teams as a development platform. What does it mean? What are the different artifacts that you can actually utilize in Microsoft Teams to build custom solutions? Especially in these times, you might be using Microsoft Teams heavily. But how can we customize it? What are the different opportunities as a developer to customize, personalize, but also develop new solutions to integrate natively inside Microsoft Teams? Afterwards, we're going to talk quickly about the SharePoint framework and Microsoft Teams. How do they fit together? What does it mean? What it means to build a SharePoint framework solution and integrate it directly within Microsoft Teams. Then we're going to go demos. I would be very honest, you're not going to be bored by PowerPoint today. You're going to have a lot of good slides, but the big majority of this session is demos, demos, demos. So if you're here to see code, you're at the right place. And then afterwards, some tips and tricks, stuff that we think that you should know and remember when you're going to start building your first SharePoint framework solution for Microsoft Teams. So before we go into the Microsoft Teams as a development platform, I'd like to ask you a question, and you can maybe use the chat to answer. I'd like to know, have you ever created a Microsoft Teams or a Microsoft or a SharePoint framework solution that lives inside Microsoft Teams. Are you familiar with that? Have you ever seen something like that? But I guess you are excited to know about this. So that's why we want to start with the basics of what means what means to bring Microsoft Teams to your own skill set.
So
first,
far, a lot of people said no, but they're excited to try it from what I see.
That's good. And I guess some of the people have SPFx skills. They have been running with the SharePoint framework, which in the end, which is the result of today's session, I think you're going to really, really love because you're really, really close to building Microsoft Teams solutions. So cool. Thanks, Vlad, for the info. What it means to have Teams. Teams is very interestingly an extremely extensible platform. Even though you might be using it in a way that you think it might not be super extensible, you know what? It's insanely extensible. The first one is through the dashboard and tools, the way that you see your app. So one of the things that we're going to talk a lot today is about tabs. See a tab as being a web part in SharePoint. So a way to integrate a piece of custom functionality directly in Microsoft Teams from a web technology standpoint. So literally here, think about an iframe directly inside Microsoft Teams that points to your website or that points to your web part in SharePoint. We're going to cover this a lot today. That's really our main topic today. But there are other things. Conversational extensible points. The first one, bots. To be able to have a conversation with a virtual assistant that can help you or can provide you information or even act on your behalf to do whatever you want in your digital workplace. So we're kind of getting used to bots more and more, but that's definitely where you can add your own custom bot using the bot framework directly inside Microsoft Teams. Then there are also messaging extensions. I'm going to show you a very quick example in a second of a messaging extension, but this is if you're talking in words of SharePoint or in terms of SharePoint, messaging extensions can be seen as custom actions. Back when we were doing SharePoint solutions more on the classic side of things, custom actions were a way to extend the interface of SharePoint to provide new functionality. But messaging extensions is very similar to that in the Microsoft Teams world. Then afterwards, you can hijack or inject data inside the activity feed of the user or inside the channels that the user is visualizing using connectors, or even enhance calls and meetings. So you can act as a participant in a meeting and record what is being said, take automatic notes using some intelligence services. There's really a lot of functionality there. Finally, all of this can be packaged as apps. So you can deploy an app that has a tab, a bot, and a connector. Wrap it up as an app, very similar to how the SharePoint framework packages are, or the WSPs in the good old SharePoint days. But you can also call some of the APIs. There are actually not a lot of Teams API that are living by themselves. There's a JavaScript SDK that enables you to connect to some of the areas of Teams, but the main driver here, the main API is the Microsoft Graph. And this is really where everything comes into play, because Teams is not about Teams. Teams is nothing without all of the other services in Office 365 and Microsoft 365. So the Microsoft Graph is your main API endpoint that you're going to use there. So tabs, what are those tabs? Tabs are web pages that are Teams aware, and they're automatically embedded in there. They can be added as part of a channel inside a team, inside a group chat, or as a personal app. And finally, it is built using any technologies as long as it lives on the web on a server. So let me show you quickly an example of this. So let me go to my Teams here. Let me open up Teams right there. I'm going to do that. And I am going to go to my Teams here. And I'm not going to spoil the end of this session. So you're going to go here, and you will be able to add tabs. You're going to see that some are custom. As you can see, those are literally custom tabs. But there's also like websites. So let's say that you want to HTTPS. No, not this. Seb's blog. HTTPS SebastianLevert.com. You will be able to embed a website directly here. So that's my site. That's my own site that lives now right within Teams. So that's one of the great example of something that is doable with Microsoft Teams. But think about how this, now it's just an iframe to my own website. It's not really exciting. But what about you could have custom code running there? Custom code like anything JavaScript, any APIs, calling to SharePoint, calling to any backend system that your organization might have. Anything is doable right there. So the best thing about this is that it is fully built for you. It's really simple and it's really intuitive. And we're going to come back to that later. The good thing is this Seb's blog can be there, can also be in any chats, but it can also be pinned here on the left side of things, where you can have your own blog running there. So it's really customizable where you can have it a little bit everywhere around the house. There's also bots, and it's really around the conversation as a service scenario. So you can react, you can act as an assistant, you can use a ton of great backend technologies to make it happen with the bot framework and all the, I call it the magical features with Lewis, the language understanding intelligence service, Azure, everything that exists in cognitive services also. This is really, 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 really cool stuff that exists. And how does this actually react? Well, you just go here in the chat and you can actually talk to, in that case here, can talk to a specific bot, and I can have a discussion with a bot. It will reply, it will give you the ability to customize the response, react based on the intent of the user. So here, it's a really, really great opportunity for you to build. We're not going to talk about it today, but definitely something that I want you to have a look at it. The messaging extensions. Messaging extensions is those custom actions that are wrapped inside the interface. And the good thing is that this is not only available on the desktop or on the web, it's also available fully within the Teams mobile app or iPad or iOS or Android or anything. So it's great because it automatically authenticates you and does a lot of things. You can search content, you can initiate actions, you can, and it's all built on the adaptive card system. So let me show you quickly one example that we have here. Let me go back here and let me go back to my post here. Here you're going to see a ton of different artifacts at the bottom. Those are all messaging extensions. One of the extensions that I have in this case, let me show you maybe this one, which is the praise. So here I can invoke what we call a task module, a site. Oh, well, that's interesting. Am I still online? Yes, I am. Interesting. So let's go back here. Here I can say, okay, I want to have an achiever badge to Seb for whatever reason, or admin. There's some issues right now, I guess, with some of the graph calls in the backend. That might be an interesting session.
Teams is under a heavy load, I think. So.
Yeah, exactly. So let's see how this goes. But the concept is that you can have integration in the UI of your custom application. And this is really where it shines. It's because it's integrated. It's not in a tab. It's where the user is. So when the user is about to congratulate someone using the message bar here, why don't you use that functionality that will make it super beautiful instead? So if I go here, yeah, that's actually pretty interesting. And I do it's pretty dead, but anyway, you will be able to post something in the channel based on the adaptive card paradigm. So this is It's there in chats, it's there in channels, it's there in bots. It's really a great way to push a little bit further the experience for Teams development. But again, this is not something we're going to touch on today. I just wanted to kind of paint out a great overview of what the Microsoft Teams app platform does. So before we go into the SharePoint framework in Microsoft Teams, Vlad, I think there are some questions in the chat right now.
It goes a lot better if I go off mute.
Yes.
There's an interesting question in there. First of all, how much of what's being shown today is likely to change when Teams goes multi-window in a few months?
That's a great question. That's a very, very good question, actually. Right now, the multi-window mode is for chat only, if I'm not mistaken. So this would actually not impact any of it, because the tabs right now are not available as part of chats for SharePoint Framework. They might become available, but this will just follow with it. So the multi-window will not have a big impact on any of these capabilities. They will just follow, basically. If you're building a messaging extension, it's going to follow with the multi-window. If you're building a tab, it's going to follow with the multi-window also.
Awesome. And another question, what would be the advantage of building with this approach compared to a simple SPA type app outside SharePoint that uses the SharePoint REST API calls to communicate with SharePoint and Teams?
That's a great question. And I think here it's literally, it depends on what you prefer. For me, the fact that the SharePoint framework handles all the authentication to the graph, all the authentication to the SharePoint API is a way for me to save time and reuse what I already built in the past. So for me, it's more around reusing and leveraging the existing skill set that you built using the SharePoint framework, but also to reuse the existing governance and lifecycle of an app in the SharePoint framework. So going through the SharePoint administrator to deploy those through the SharePoint App Store, App Catalog, all of these really make sense from a governance and enterprise standpoint. So those are, for me, kind of the main reasons why. And also because it's just easy. You're going to see it's really, really easy to change an existing SharePoint framework solution to add 1 or 2 lines of code and make it a Teams app. Cool. Thanks a lot for the question.
That's it for now. Yeah, you can continue on. I'm sure more will come soon.
Absolutely. Thank you. So SharePoint framework and Microsoft Teams. So what does it mean? It means the following. It means that we are going to build something great, but without a lot of efforts. We're going to leverage the existing SharePoint framework components from a user experience standpoint. So we're going to be able to build a client-side web part. We're going to be able to integrate with some site and lists. We're going to be able to manage the JavaScript files. All the page context will be available. So it's really, really easy to reuse all of what you already know, but also it's going to leverage the existing packaging and deployment. So to come back a little bit to my question that I was answering, it's using the same client-side solutions. It's also utilizing tenant scope. So it has to go through admin approvals. Why? Because now everybody could deploy Teams applications. It's really important now. And it's also CDN hosting. So you don't have to care about where you put your files, hosting your files and everything. No, SharePoint takes care of hosting everything for you. So from a hosting perspective, it's literally free. It's included as part of your service contract with O365. So it's all included. Really cool. The build process, also exactly the same. Yeoman templates, it's Gulp, it's the SharePoint Workbench, it's the Lifecycle API to be able to automatically deploy those apps. So really, really, really great. Now from a SharePoint Framework standpoint, what does it mean? What means that Microsoft Teams integration? So first of all, SharePoint Framework supports Microsoft Teams as a native integration area since SharePoint Framework 1.8. This is somewhere mid-2019 approximately. What you have, or what you had at the time, is the ability to create tabs using the same tooling as SharePoint Framework. But since SharePoint Framework 1.10, the scope of what is available as part of Microsoft Teams support inside SharePoint Framework is game-changing. Just the fact that you can bring personal tabs and native mobile support to your SharePoint Framework, you're going to see it now. You just opened up a brand new world of customization opportunities with the SharePoint Framework. So I want to make sure that you guys understand that without a lot of code, you can literally take any web part that you already have and make them super powerful and visible through any Microsoft Teams client that exists out there. And that's really where it's really, really powerful. What do you have to do? Well, there's one thing. You go to your web part in your SharePoint Framework solution, and you add, as a supported host, one thing. You're going to just bring the Teams tab or the Personal Teams tab. And now SharePoint Framework knows that it is available for you to push this web part to any of those hosts. There's a SharePoint web part, which is the basic host for SharePoint web part. I think you got it. But the Teams tab is what is basically new here. Then afterwards, you're going to have to do one thing. Just offer an icon. And actually, when you create it by default, it comes by default where you have an icon already in there. And those icons will be what will be seen by your users. And finally, gulp bundle. So you're going to create a bundle of your SharePoint Framework web part. You're going to package your solution. And then afterwards, there's going to be some interesting thing. You're going to sync it to Microsoft Teams. So as you can see, and let me just change my pointer here, you see here that now when I select this solution, which is in my app catalog, there is a button here called Sync to Teams. What it's going to do, it's going to create all the artifacts that Microsoft Teams require from an app perspective, and will make all of this available directly within your Microsoft Teams client. Then when you're going to go and add a tab, you will be able to see that app right here as any other app that exists in your Microsoft Teams App Store. It's controlled. It's manageable through app policies at the Teams level. So if you want to limit who can access this app, who has this app automatically installed in their clients, who can install, who cannot install it, who can view it, who cannot view it, you can do that at the Microsoft Teams level. And then afterwards, it's magic. Magic happens. Why? Because it literally runs your web part inside Microsoft Teams. But we say magic, there's a logic behind that magic for sure. And I want to, before we go into the demo mode, I want to show you a little bit about the magic. But let another round of this amazing gift just before we go. Thank you very much. So what's the trick? We have in Microsoft Teams a tab. That tab is a URL to our web part. The web part is actually using kind of a host page in SharePoint that lives in the site where you add this Teams tab, and is using the following URL. So we are going to use this. We're going to use a jumpstart page, and that's automatically managed by Microsoft Teams and SharePoint Framework. But here, when you get to this teamslogon.aspx, this is where the most complex part is taking place. Sorry. This means that you don't have to care about SSO, authentication, conditional access, or whatsoever. Teams automatically logs you into SharePoint, even though you never opened SharePoint before, even though you're not even connected to SharePoint or whatsoever. Teams will be able to communicate through some first-party APIs to log you in. And then once you're being logged in, you're going to be redirected to a destination. And that destination is this current URL. Look at this URL. It's the current site /layouts15 teams hosted app.aspx. It is a page that just renders a single web part in full screen, where you have a list ID, the ID of the web part, and the instance ID. What does it mean? It means that not only you can run a web part, but you can also configure the web part and store its data in a hidden list that lives inside the site. So every single tab that you're creating can have different set of configuration. So I'd like to be able to show you all of this, and that's what we're going to do right now. Let's jump into demo mode. Let me go here, put that down, and start from scratch. So first of all, let me zoom that in a little bit. We will be using this React Graph Calendar. This is a SharePoint Framework web part that was updated to the latest SPFx 1.10 to leverage the new personal app capabilities, and is available on the SPDev FX web parts GitHub repository that lives in the SharePoint organization. This is where you will be able to find like a ton of different samples around SharePoint Framework. This one is really the one that we're covering today. All the code is there, so that's actually pretty cool. So you can go there, do a clone of this repo, and you're going to be able to start from scratch. Then afterwards, today our topic is around Graph, around React, and around Teams. So before we go anywhere, let me do a couple of things. And just to show you it's not a cooking show where we have stuff ready, let me create an event here, have dinner with Vlad, because Vlad is a great cooker, a great cook, sorry. He did some great brisket this week that I've heard.
Did you see that picture? 36 hours.
I did see that, and to be fairly honest, tomorrow is my wife's birthday. So I'm going to put it in my agenda because I might forget. So this is my personal calendar. Also something that is, and we're going to start with that, is also possible in Office 365 is to have group calendar. So if you look at the left side here, I selected the Project Las Vegas. And here, I'm a big hockey fan or ice hockey fan. And here I'm going to say, I hope the NHL starts again. But you know what? This is not going to happen. But still, I want to have this event right here. And let's say another event, Montreal Canadiens win the Stanley Cup. Hey, we can still dream. We're allowed to dream in those hard times. So I have now 4 different calendar events that exist on my calendar. So let me show you what this app is actually doing. Let me go to my teams. My teams here, I'm going to find a team called Project Las Vegas. Well, we all know that a team is actually a set of different components or different services in O365 that are all connected through the O365 group component. And this group component has a SharePoint site associated to it. So let me go here and open in SharePoint. I think now, there we go. Now we have the open in SharePoint right here. So here, I just opened actually my document library directly here. So let me go to my pages. And in my pages, I'm going to find a page called Events. In this Events, I'm going to find, look at that, a calendar, a really great component. By the way, this is one of the big missing pieces of SharePoint today where there's no good calendar component. So you can definitely leverage this to embed it in any of your teams that you have. But here you see that I can find my information here. I can go here. I can go from one month to the other, You can see that we had some events happening last month. So here you see it's really live, and it does that. But what I promised is this exact same web part. So this is a web part that exists in a SharePoint page where I can go and edit the web part. I can do some changes here. Let's say that I want to load a maximum of 300 events per page, or per month, actually. In that case, I don't have that many events, but I could have. So I was able to save it. Nothing more complicated than that. But what happened in the back end is when I deployed this, I used that sync to Teams. So what does it mean? It means that now I can go here and add a graph calendar. I go here, and now I'm going to see a big Teams logo. Usually in Teams, you configure the experience, or the way that this web part will react, or this app, sorry, not this web part, this tab will react in this screen. But as we're leveraging SharePoint Framework, we also want to leverage the same existing capabilities that SharePoint Framework has from a configuration standpoint, which is the configuration panel that exists on the right. So how do we do that? You go here and you hit save. It's going to deploy the graph calendar, and now it's going to allow me automatically to configure it. Let's put it to 265. I'm going to close it. It's going to reload it, and now my graph calendar is ready. This is exactly the same code that actually runs this experience here. This experience somewhere here. Exactly the same code, exactly the same way, nothing different. It's exactly the same code running both. So that's already really cool. That's the first element that really makes it super powerful. Now your web part can be embedded. Think about a help desk web part that you might have built, or a provisioning web part that you might have built, or even a discussion forum that you might have built in the past, a roll-up of news. All of these different web parts can now, from a couple of line code changes in Microsoft Teams, or in SharePoint Framework, these will make this possible. But what is also really great since SharePoint Framework 1.10 is the ability to have all of that on the left rail. Here, this is what we call the personal apps. If I'm going here, I can see that I can have more apps. I can go to my own apps here, and I can literally add this graph calendar right there, which is already here. And when I click on it, you're going to see it's now full screen. It takes my entire Teams client. Why? Because it's not connected to any chat. It's not connected to any Teams. It's just personal. So what does it allow me to do? It allows me to have that graph calendar right in there. Okay, is it necessarily useful as a personal tabs when you have the other calendar right there? Maybe not. But just think about how this could add some huge value to your organization to have any of these right there. And the functionality is exactly the same. We have exactly the same thing. So what does it mean? It means that now you can build any, let's call them full screen apps in Microsoft Teams on the web, on the client, and even on the mobile app. So from a code perspective, everything I just showed, what is the trick? What is different? How can we make it, why is that so easy? Well, let's start by the first thing, and let's go to our manifest. Here we have the code, exactly the version that is running, that is hosted in GitHub. And you're going to find here the graph calendar web part manifest. This manifest is where all the information about this web part is being stored. So if you go here, you're going to find the schema, the ID, the alias, the component type, blah, 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 but especially this. You see here, there's SharePoint web part, which is one of the ways that you can host your SharePoint Framework web part. You can host it as a SharePoint web part. If it's not there, it's not going to be available as part of the web parts available in SharePoint. So you can also think about, oh, maybe what I'm building right now is only for Teams. It makes no sense in SharePoint. I just want to reuse the toolkit, tool chain, all the build mechanisms, but I don't want to have it in SharePoint. It's possible also. But also, you can have it as part of a Teams tab or a Teams personal app, which is the left rail that exists right there. So that's the first thing that you actually have to do here. And you know what? It's actually the last thing that you have to do. When you're going to build this, automatically, it's going to be available for you to push this app to Microsoft Teams as part of the app catalog. So when you're going to build this using the Gulp bundle and Gulp package, we're going to go here to our apps solution. I'm going to go right here. I'm going to find here my React Graph client. And you're going to see here, you're going to have a sync to Teams. When I'm going to do that, it's going to package it up. It's going to create the manifest for Teams, including the title, the editor, the images, and all of that. And it's going to automatically make it available as part of your corporate store directly inside Microsoft Teams. So this is as easy as it is to push any type of SharePoint Framework components in your tenant. So that's one of the main benefits of this. Then afterwards, what does it mean from a code perspective? Well, let me show you a little bit. Let me start here by the graph calendar webpart.ts file. The TS file, or the web part file, is the entry point to your web part. It's literally it's literally a very simple file that usually embeds some of the components that you have built. In this case, we're doing a couple of things. So first, we're getting a reference to the Teams context, because we want to have the Teams context and actually pass the Teams context to our components. So our components don't have to get a full reference to all of our web part, but we only want to have access to the Teams context. Here, we're going to pass in to our graph calendar, which is our main component, the limit. The limit is what we have on the right side on the property pane, the number of items that we want to fetch every single time we load the data from the graph. We're going to also have the context and the Teams context. But the Team context has to be generated before anything. And that's why we are running on init a couple of different things. First, we're setting a default if the limit has not been defined. So if it's not there, we're going to set it to 100 at least. Then afterwards, if we have a context, here this is where it allows us to kind of validate, am I running in Teams or am I running in SharePoint? If I'm not running in SharePoint, so it means that I do have the context that SDKs, that Microsoft Teams object is not null, so it has a value in there. Now I know that I am in Teams. I can set my Teams context. Here we have to do a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a hack, but a fix for the Office UI Fabric icons to make sure that they do show up if we don't call this, as the page is so simple, the one that is hosted in as part of the tab. Your icons won't load. So if you want it to be beautiful, you want to load this. And that's it. The rest, very simple, regular SharePoint framework stuff. So here, that's literally the only thing that we added to make sure that this is in there. But as you can guess, everything happens in our component that is called the graph calendar. So let's go see what the graph calendar is doing and why it's so important. So here we have my graph calendar. We have some state in there, a couple of different tab types in here. And the first thing it does when it constructs the object, the component, first it validates if it is running in Teams. How do we do that? Exactly the same way we did it earlier. we are validating if we're having a context. If the context of Teams was passed into our component, then we can consider that we are inside Microsoft Teams. If we're in Microsoft Teams, we can do a load or in dynamic load or dynamic import of a SCSS file, of a SAS file, of our styles. And this is why when I go back to my app here, if I'm going here to this page, as you can see, the theme is being respected. I have the same colors for my buttons, the same colors for my events. It respects the theme of the site. Actually, if I was going here, I was going to change the look, go to the theme. It's connected to a hub, so I cannot. But if I was changing the theme, I would be able to change the color automatically. So that's cool. That's one of the big features of the Office UI Fabric, is to support theming automatically. But when I go to the graph here, I will find a very, I think they call it the purple, a mix between blue and purple. You're gonna find this. So we can hook into the UI of Teams and make sure that we are styling this component or these CSS changes based on the colors of Teams. So when we go back to our code and we're looking at this graph calendar teams.module, it's a very simple file where we are literally utilizing some of the colors from Teams to change the way that our calendar looks like. I'm using, in that case, an open source calendar component called the full calendar. So that's why I'm using those classes. But if you're building your own components that are not calendar related, then you will be able to style them using this. Something really cool also, when I go back to my graph calendar here, is that I can, from the Teams context, now that I know that I'm in Teams, I know that I have a Teams context, I can also validate what is the current context of the theme that I've been using. As you can see, I'm a very dark mode guy. So I actually prefer Teams in a dark mode. So what does it mean? It means that here I will be able also to dynamically import my Teams dark module. So if I go back to my website here, and I go to my face and I literally change in the settings, I go dark. Now, if I reload this guy here, you're gonna see that now it looks good. We change the colors, we change the background, we change the color of the lines, we change even the scheme of the purple a little bit. So in that case, it makes a lot of sense. So you can really have the full context of what is happening around this code. Then afterwards, a couple of things here. I won't go into the details of every single line of code. What I want to really show is the ability to do the following. And this is where it's amazing to be able to run code on either SharePoint or Teams using the SharePoint framework, because this is really where all this action takes place. So here we're validating. If we have a group ID, if we're part of a team, or we are inside SharePoint, I want to be able to run this specific code. I'm going here, I'm getting the graph factory, the graph client factory. You will be able to get the client to be able to connect to the Microsoft Graph. The beauty of utilizing the Microsoft Graph client factory is the fact that it handles automatically authentication of and getting the token, renewing the token, and everything to the Microsoft Graph. So you don't have to manage this in your code. Leave that to the SharePoint framework. Be lazy. Give that to the SharePoint framework. Once you get the client, you will be able to create an API call here. In that case, I want to get the group / this group ID / events. So I will be able to automatically call into the events endpoint of the Microsoft Graph. So graph.microsoft.com /v1 /groups / the ID of the group / events. If I'm actually in a personal tab, let's replace that by /me /events. I don't want to care about the group because I'm not. So here, we're just changing the scope very quickly. And I can call the API here on the V1, selecting those different properties, filter by the current view that we have in there, and finally, just get the results, working around the results to format them so we can send them to our calendar element. And then afterwards, just simply setting the states around these are the events that I just loaded. In that specific example, I have 260 lines of code for a fully working graph calendar that works in SharePoint, in Teams as a Teams tab inside a team, or as a personal tab. There was really few components that I had to change to make it Teams aware. The first one was this one on the manifest here, and finally on the graph component, I had to do a little bit of checkup to make sure that where am I, what am I looking for here? Am I in a personal tab or not? But besides that, we have literally nothing that is supposed to be done. So from a simplicity standpoint, and from a way to build a SharePoint Framework web part, it is just plain simple. Super easy. Now let me go back to slides a little bit to wrap it up for a couple of minutes yet. A couple of tips and tricks. When you're going to start, think about those so you don't take a left turn when you should be doing a right turn. So some of the tips and tricks that I have, the first one, make sure that you are understanding the Teams context. Use that as an indicator that you are running inside Teams or not. If you're not using this, it's going to be a little bit more complicated. But if you are using this, with a simple call, you will be able to validate, am I in Teams? Then you will be able to branch out for some conditional code if you need to use it. Then afterwards, you will be able to support SharePoint and themes in Microsoft Teams. So now that you know that you are running in Teams, you can also conditionally loop in some of the CSS that you might want to showcase to your users because you're running in Teams. The dark mode, bringing the purple into play. And it's really important when you're building an app, make it look like it's Teams native. It makes the user adopt your solution a lot more. Make it even prettier. If just changing the colors are not enough, use the Office UI fabric. Make sure that you're not reinventing the wheels. Grab some of the components that are out there. There's even some open source initiatives with ready-made reusable controls. And if this is not enough, and you really want to go all in the Teams development, there's a new project called the Fluent UI. Fluent UI is the framework that's going to merge the Office UI fabric and the Microsoft, it used to be called Stardust, and before that it was called Semantic UI. But Stardust is the language, the UI language, sorry, that Microsoft Teams is using. So we're bringing those together. So by utilizing Fluent UI, you will be able to build a fully native Teams app that really looks like Teams. So for me, if you want to go only Teams because it makes sense for your organization to build that web part only for Teams, please use it. Please use the Fluent UI for this. Test with the real thing. Everything I showed today is using the browser. The browser is easy. The browser is really easy. Don't test just in SharePoint. Don't even test just in the browser. Go inside your full rich Teams client. The debugging experience is not as good as the browser version, but at least in the final steps, please validate all of this using using your full Teams client. Super important. You're going to be able to test your production environment, including your SSO, your conditional access, and everything, sometimes you could be hit hard by those surprises at the end. And also, think about it. It can also be just about Teams. You can hide a web part from SharePoint and never hear again about this web part in SharePoint. You can really utilize this series or this set of skills that you have and just leverage them for Microsoft Teams. I'm going to leave the resources page here. All the different, I think, interesting resources that you might want to look at when you're building a Microsoft Teams solution. You're going to find the GitHub repo that I just showcased, but also a couple of a walkthrough, a couple of the Fabric site, the Office UI, and you can also find in the end some of the resources that I did a couple of months ago in a conference called ESPC. You will have access to the slides and to the recording. I'm going to make them available to Vlad as soon as we're done today. And now, Vlad, do we have some questions in queue that I could answer before we close this call?
So I have a question here from Pedram. Is there an easy way to use Microsoft Teams connectors to combine data from different data sources, such as sales data from Salesforce or Microsoft CRM on the calendar?
Oh, that's interesting. Definitely. So what you could do is build a connector. Is actually fairly simple component. It is a web a service that you build that pushes a JSON object to an actual endpoint inside Microsoft Teams. So you could react to those and automatically afterwards integrate them into the calendar. It has to be coded. There's nothing that magically can sync up data. One of your best option, I think, depending on your use case, might also be to leverage Microsoft Flow, or well, sorry about that, Microsoft Power Automate and or Logic apps to build these kind of integrations. Getting a signal from Salesforce and creating an event in the calendar using the Microsoft Graph, for instance. That could definitely be possible.
Awesome. And I think everybody, if you have any questions, now is the time. If not, in 30 seconds, we're going to let everyone go. There's still 60 people on the call. So I guess you just did an amazing job. And you're not only a fairly good dev, you're a pretty good dev. Ooh, this one will be tough. I'm not sure. Actually, two of them that just came in. Nice. So one of them, do connectors provide an API for fetching data in React?
No, you cannot connect to a connector. You cannot fetch data from a connector. You have to go to exactly the source of data. So you need to go to Salesforce or whatever other system you want to do and manage the authentication. So you have to do that. What I highly suggest is to build a server-side component like an Azure function that will do that and will automatically manage your authentication. So that's, for me, something that you should be doing. There's no magic with connectors, so you have to get your data yourself, sadly.
Thank you. And one last one, which I think is a bit off topic, and I'm not sure it's your area of expertise, Seb, but can you connect to Microsoft Project Server and create an app?
Actually, you know what? It's a pretty good question, and I think it's a great scenario for a personal Teams tab. As let's say you want to see all your latest tasks in Project Server, or let's call it Project for now, or Project Online, or whatever it's called today. So there are APIs for Project in Microsoft 365. So what I would recommend is to leverage one of the libraries that are open source, which is called PnP.js. PnP.js is a wrapper on top of SharePoint, Graph, but also Project Server APIs. So you can actually, without even caring about the authentication, because it's all handled by PnP.js, you could create exactly the same thing that I've been doing, but instead connect this to your tasks in Project Server and fetch them and automatically show them on that calendar. So there's a little bit of work that needs to be done, but yes, it's totally possible. As you are in the context of SharePoint, your authentication is all managed, so it simplifies a lot of those calls. So yes, good question. I haven't done it. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, but definitely something that would be surprisingly simple, I think, at this point.
Awesome. Well, Seb, that's it for the questions. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for everybody who attended. I really hope that you guys enjoyed, and like I promised, I will send you the slides and the recording by end of day tomorrow. It will be on a public YouTube, so feel free to share it with your coworkers, tech friends, or anyone who you think might enjoy this talk. Thank you very much, Seb, and enjoy the rest of the week, everybody.
Cheers, everyone.